very much. Let me start in. If truth be told, my remarks really are based on something I wrote about 30 years ago, but I'm resurrecting this at the moment, so I hope that's okay. So I want to begin. I'm going to try to stick to the text too, because otherwise I may find myself talking very quickly. So I'll try not to read, but at the same time, I'll try and stick to the text. So I pace myself a little better than I might otherwise. Okay, I want to begin by noting something I think is rather important about free speech. That's freedom of expression. I'll use the terms interchangeably. That I think is often just not noted. And I think it's important. And that is that the freedom doesn't just protect individual liberty from state interference. It protects the individual's freedom to communicate with others, to speak to others, and to hear what others have to say. The right of the individual is to participate in activity that is deeply social, that's dependent upon socially created language, and employs collective resources like the streets or the internet. And I think that's really important to take note. The claim I want to make is that freedom of expression is valuable because human agency, human identity emerge in discourse, in the joint activity of creating meaning. Human reflection and judgment are dependent on socially created languages which give shape to idea and feeling. The fact is we become individuals capable of thought and judgment when we join in conversation with others and participate in collective life. The justifications for freedom of expression are generally described in this way as based on truth, democracy, or ideas of autonomy or self-realization. It's said that freedom of expression must be protected because it contributes to the public's recognition of truth or to the growth of public shared knowledge in some way, or because it's necessary to the operation of a democratic form of government, or because it's necessary to individual self-realization or autonomy. And most commentators, most judges take the position that all three of these justifications are necessary to account for the broad protection that's granted to speech or expression, including scientific expression, artistic expression, political expression, intimate expression, expression of many different kinds. Now, it seems to me that whether or not one focuses on truth, democracy, or autonomy, self-realization, each of the established accounts of freedom of expression rests upon some recognition of the social character of individual agency, individual identity. Each recognizes, even if it's not explicit in these accounts, that identity and agency are realized in communicative interaction with friends, family, coworkers, and other members of the community. An individual's ideas take shape when they are expressed in language, when they are given symbolic form of some kind. Language enables us to give form to our feelings and ideas, or in the words of Charles Taylor, to bring them to fuller and clearer consciousness. The individual reflects upon his or her ideas and feelings by giving them symbolic form and putting them before himself, herself, and others as part of an ongoing discourse. The individual understands his or her articulated ideas and feelings in light of the reactions and responses from others. And at the same time, the views of the listener, of the audience, are also reshaped in the process of understanding and reacting to the speaker's words and incorporating the speaker's words and thoughts into one's own framework. This intersubjective understanding of agency and identity underlies the claims, it seems to me, that freedom of expression contributes to the recognition of truth, the advancement of democracy, and the realization of self. Again, freedom of expression is valuable because in communicating with others, an individual gives shape to his or her ideas, feelings, aspirations, and becomes capable of reflection and evaluation and gains understanding of him or herself and the world. And of course, through communication, an individual creates different kinds of relationships with others and participates in different forms of different kinds of collective activities, such as self-government or the pursuit of knowledge. Now, the established accounts of freedom of expression are often described as either instrumental in character or intrinsic in character. In other words, as either concerned with the realization of a social goal of some kind, realization or growth of knowledge, the operation of democratic form of government, or with the protection of an individual right. So some accounts see freedom of expression as valuable in itself. The freedom is intrinsically valuable because it is said, it contributes or it enables, free and rational individuals to express their ideas and feelings. Other accounts see the freedom as important because it contributes to a valued state of affairs. Freedom of expression is instrumental, it is said, to the realization of social goods, such as public knowledge or democratic governance. Intrinsic accounts assume that freedom of expression, like other rights, is an aspect of the individual's fundamental liberty or autonomy, and as such should be insulated from the demands of collective welfare. Yet any account that regards freedom of expression as an individual liberty, as a right of the individual to be free from external interference, seems unable to explain the other regarding or the community-oriented character of the protected activity of expression, of the fact that it protects the right of individuals to speak and listen to others. Instrumental accounts, on the other hand, recognize that the freedom protects another regarding or social activity, and so must be understood with something more than respect for individual autonomy or the exercise of individual reason. These accounts assume that the freedom must be concerned with social goals, such as truth or democracy, that are in some way separate from or beyond the individual and his or her communicative actions. Yet if freedom of expression is instrumental, if it's an instrumental right, its fundamental character seems less obvious. And its value then is contingent on its contribution to these goals, whether it be social or whether it be democracy or truth. And of course, there are no shortage of arguments that the freedom does not, and certainly does not always, advance these goals. I want to suggest that the value, and as I will argue shortly, the potential harm of expression will remain unclear as long as discussion about its value or importance is locked into this instrumental intrinsic dichotomy. The value of the freedom rests upon the social nature of individuals and the constitutive character of discourse. I think once we recognize that individual agency and identity emerge in the social relationship of communication, this traditional split between instrumental and intrinsic accounts, social and individual accounts, I might describe them as, of the value, this dichotomy dissolves. Expression connects the individual as speaker or as listener with others, and in so doing contributes to his or her capacity for understanding and judgment and to his or her engagement in community life. The arguments described as instrumental focus on the contribution of speech to the collective goals of truth or knowledge and democracy. Yet we don't value truth as an abstract social achievement. We value it rather as something that is consciously realized by members of the community, individually and collectively. Similarly, freedom of expression is not simply a tool or instrument that contributes to democratic government. We value freedom of expression not simply because it provides individuals with useful political information, but more fundamentally because it is the way in which individuals participate in collective self-governance. There is no way to separate the goal from the process, the goal from the process, or the individual good from the public good. Attaching the label intrinsic to autonomy or self-realization based accounts of the freedom seems also to misdescribe the value at stake. Again, communication is a joint or public process in which participants realize their human capacities. When an individual communicates with others, they do not simply express their pre-existing ideas about things. The individual's views and more broadly, his or her judgment take shape in the process of communication. Now, I'll also add quickly that freedom of expression theories are sometimes categorized as either listener or speaker centered in character. And when we speak about listener-centered theories, they tend to emphasize the right of the individual, the right of the listener to hear and judge expression for him or herself. And the listener's right is protected as a matter of respect for their autonomy as a rational agent, or because of its contribution to social goals, such as development of truth or the operation of a democratic form of government. On the other hand, speaker-centered theories tend to emphasize the value of self-expression, the individual's freedom to express themselves. That's understood to be part of the individual's basic autonomy, or as critical to the development of their own personality. Each of these accounts, listener or speaker, recognizes in some sense the connection between listening and speaking, and yet it tends to value either one or the other, or if it values both, it values them as distinct or different interests of some kind. And as such, I think misses the central dynamic of the freedom, and that is the communicative relationship in which the interests of speaker and listener are tied. The activities of speaking and listening are part, again, of a process or a relationship. And this relationship, again, is valuable because individual agency flourishes in the joint activity of creating meaning. Okay. In each of the established accounts of freedom of expression, the freedom is seen as protecting communication. And communication generally in this context understood to be the act in which an individual seeks to convey a message to a listener, to an audience of some kind. As many of you will know, the Supreme Court of Canada in the Irwin Toy case, 1989, many years ago, defined expression in these terms as any act that is intended to convey a message. In fact, they made it clear that the freedom was very broad in its scope. What counted as expression was broad in its scope. To illustrate the potential breadth of the protection, the court used the example of parking a car against the rules and said that ordinarily parking a car is not an act of expression, but if the individual engages in this act, parks against the rules in order to protest something, in order to convey a message, that makes it an act of expression. So it turns out that virtually any act could, in theory, be an act of expression if it is performed for a particular reason in order to convey a message. The consequence, of course, of that is that any law that is restrictive in character could potentially be a restriction on expression if the individual happens to have chosen a particular way, contrary to that law, to expressing him or herself. There's lots more that could be said about that, but I won't attempt to get into that at this point. What I would say is that an act of expression or communication characterized by this idea of the actor's intention to convey some kind of meaning, some kind of idea or feeling, is a part of all this, but it's important to recognize that part of what I think we think about when we're talking about expression is we understand the speaker as wanting the audience to recognize that they are seeking to convey a message. And ideally, the audience will recognize that and view the act of expression as carrying meaning and seek to understand that act. And I think that's important to recognize as part of what we talk about when we talk about expression. I want to also say that recognition that human agency and identity emerge in communicative interaction is crucial to understanding not just the value of expression, but also its potential for harm. Our dependence on expression means that words can sometimes be harmful in different ways. Expression can threaten, it can harass, it can undermine self-esteem. Expression can also be deceptive or manipulative in character. So language enables us to formulate and communicate ideas and to understand the ideas of others, but it's not a transparent medium. It's not an instrument that lies within our perfect control. Whether speech in any particular case, a particular form of expression, whether it encourages independent judgment. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm doing things out of order here. Let me just return here and say, the court's task in the adjudication of free speech claims is not simply, and I want to even suggest is not often, about striking the fair or just balance between competing interests, between, for example, the value of expression and the importance of public safety. It is, I think, more often about whether or not the expression engages the audience in a way that deserves protection, in a way that advances the values that are said to underlie our commitment to freedom of expression. At issue in many freedom of expression cases is whether or not the speech encourages independent judgment or whether or not it harasses or manipulates the audience. When speech seems intended to harass, deceive, or intimidate its audience, it may no longer be viewed as communicative engagement, as part of a discourse that is entitled to constitutional protection. Now, of course, the judgment that expression is valuable and worthy of protection, or is, on the other hand, harmful and appropriately subject to restriction, that it's manipulative rather than informative, or that it is harassing or intimidating rather than simply uncivil, it's a relative judgment. And it's a judgment that will depend on a number of factors, such as the form of expression and the context in which it occurs, including the distribution of communicative power. So the state, I want to suggest, may be justified in restricting certain forms of expressive activity in cases involving tobacco advertising or hate speech, not simply because the harm they may cause, the spread of hatred or increased tobacco use, but also, and perhaps more importantly, because of how they cause harm, the way the expression influences or impacts the audience. And if expression is a valuable activity, then we should be concerned not just about direct censorship by the state, but also about the opportunities available to individuals to express themselves and to participate in public discourse. Opportunities that depend on the distribution of communicative opportunities in the general community. But of course, freedom of expression is generally understood, conventionally understood, as a negative right that protects the individual's communicative activity from state interference. Any attempt to read the constitutional right to free speech, freedom of expression, as requiring the expansion of communicative opportunities for some members of the community has to contend with the structural constraints on the court's ability to engage in the redistribution of communicative power. The tension between the distributive demands of freedom of expression and the structure of constitutional adjudication is apparent in the court's attempt to define communicative access to government property or government-created platforms for expression. While this right rests on concerns about communicative opportunity, it's narrowly defined and awkwardly framed in the constitutional language of state interference with individual liberty. I got 5 minutes? Okay, I'll squeeze in a little bit more. All right. No, it's fine. A commitment to freedom of expression means that an individual must be free to speak to others and to hear what others have to say without interference from the state. It's said often that the answer to bad or erroneous speech is not censorship, but rather more and better speech. And importantly, the listener, not the speaker, is seen as responsible as an independent agent for any actions he or she takes in response to what he or she may hear, including harmful actions. This ties into the heckler's veto idea. Whether these actions occur because they agree or disagree with what the speaker has had to say. In other words, respect for the autonomy of the individual as either speaker or listener means that speech is not ordinarily regarded as a cause of harmful action. A speaker does not cause harm because they have persuaded the audience of a particular view, and the audience acts on that view in a harmful way. Now, with that said, underlying this idea, underlying the refusal to treat speech as a cause of harm, is a belief that humans are substantially rational beings capable of evaluating factual and other information, an assumption as well that a wide range of views are available to the audience, competing views of different kinds. And there may actually be a third, but less obvious assumption that underpins the protection of freedom of expression. And that is that the state has the effective power to either prevent or punish harmful action by the audience. Individuals will make poor judgments sometimes, and the community's willingness to bear the risk of errors in judgment of this kind may depend on the state's ability to prevent the harmful actions of the audience members, or at least to hold the audience members to account for the actions they may take. Now, of course, freedom of expression doctrine has always permitted the restriction of expression that occurs in a form or in a context that discourages independent judgment by the audience, or that it impedes the audience's ability to assess the claims made or the implications of acting on those claims. The courts recognize that the assumptions about the audience's agency or judgment which underlie the protection of speech may not always hold. And certainly we see famous examples, the false yell of fire in the crowded theater, or John Stuart Mill's example of the fiery speech given to farmers angry about crop prices outside the corn merchant's home, as examples that have always been offered to say, well, these are circumstances, these are situations where the conditions necessary for the protection of speech no longer hold and restriction is justified. What I want to leave you with, and I'm sure my 5 minutes are up now, is what happens when these assumptions are not just not present in certain exceptional circumstances, but are in fact eroded in very significant ways. And it seems to me that's where we might be right now in terms of public discourse and public conversation, that these assumptions about individuals being exposed to a range of views, operating in a reasonable and rational way, may no longer be holding and may no longer hold. And that leaves us with real challenges to how to think about and how to apply freedom of expression in this new world. Thank you.